So I've noticed ever since Skyrim rose to massive mainstream popularity that it seems like many game developers are rushing to hop on the never-ending trend of open-world games. In general, since the mid-2010s up till the present, there's been this big push for larger, open-ended design rather than the classic sort of linear style levels we saw in the past. On the surface, I don't think this is a bad thing. In fact, I think it's quite a good idea and it opens up a lot of possibilities, and if done right, I think that open world as a concept could be the next big step for gaming. But the problem is that while it's nice in theory, the execution of these open world games has been pretty poor in recent releases. Most of them that come out today are soulless and empty with little to actually do, and they end up feeling more like a heavily watered down and flavorless version of their linear predecessors, and I think this is overwhelmingly the case with Halo Infinite's campaign especially. Before we go ahead and start, remember to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and with that out of the way, let's get into it. When I first heard Halo Infinite was going open world, I was excited. Ever since I was a little kid playing Halo 2, I always dreamed of a large-scale Halo game where there would be drivable scarabs and base building, maybe more enemies and giant battles, not unlike what we see in Ravenfield, stretched across a massive open-world map where the player could go anywhere and pick and choose missions as they saw fit. I remember thinking to myself, maybe there will even be loads of side quests where we can get different objectives from some iconic Halo characters or find special hidden areas. But boy, was I disappointed when I played the Halo Infinite campaign. No side quests, not much in the way of exploration, extremely limited weapons sandbox, the list goes on. The first thing I noticed upon completing the game was that it felt extremely lackluster for a $60 product. 343 made the decision to cut the multiplayer and make it free to play, so by that logic, half the game is free. So then charging $60 for the campaign, there should be twice as much campaign content then, right? Considering they're having the standard price of $60? Well, there wasn't. Not only did we get a fairly bare-bones experience with campaign, but we also only got a total of 3 environments to fight in. You had Forerunner interiors, very limited amount of Banished interiors, and then you had this mountain alpine biome, and that was it. This game took 60 years to make, cost $60 to buy, and that's all we get. Now, this is the obvious issue that many others have already addressed, but I just wanted to put this out of the way and talk about it in the beginning, but I really want to ask, why was this the case? Combat Evolved is often criticized for reusing levels and having many of the same environments repeated over and over again, yet in that game we still got more variety than Halo Infinite. We got snowy mountains, a UNSC interior, Covenant interior, Forerunner interior, swamps, desert plateau, and an alpine environment. And not to mention that those environments were all varied in their presentation. Look at this part of the second level, for example. Here, we can see a large Forerunner tower situated on the edge of a cliff. And then here, we have another tower, but in a valley. They're the same tower, but the environment they're placed in looks drastically different. Where many areas in Halo Infinite basically boil down to either an outpost by some rocks or another outpost by some other rocks. There's nothing distinctive about them that makes them memorable. Now, I'm not saying that Combat Evolved was perfect and never repetitive, but Halo Infinite is far worse. I say again, why is it that we only essentially got 3 environments in this game? I think Infinite is overall, it has pretty solid gameplay that is fun to play with, but doing so in the same scenery for the entire game makes it feel incredibly boring and stale. At least with Combat Evolved, if a level got too repetitive, it was only just that, one level, not the whole game. Halo Infinite forces you into this mountainy alpine environment for virtually the entire thing. I once heard someone describe Halo Infinite as the second level of Combat Evolved, but it's 10 hours long. And that pretty accurately sums it up. The lack of biomes and variety within the campaign feels incredibly lazy and uninspired. Not only was the game's environments repetitive and boring, but it also wasn't really that functional. For some reason, enemies often despawn in plain view of the player. If I had to guess, this was probably done for performance reasons, but it really shows to me that not a lot of thought was really put into this. I mean, in previous Halo games, if a Phantom dropship was flying away, it either disappeared well off screen, or as was the case in Halo 4, it just kind of shrunk out of existence. I never liked the method used in Halo 4, but it was still better than this. In Infinite, enemies will literally just straight up despawn right in front of your view. Then there's the foliage. For some reason, in Halo Infinite, the vast majority of the trees are completely static. They can't move at all, which makes driving vehicles almost a disadvantage to the player. I'm talking about the simplest of stuff. Small trees can straight up stop a tank in its tracks, and warthogs seem to catch on just about everything. A tiny little rock will send a ghost flying until it topples over. It really makes you not want to use vehicles at all, aside from the Wasp or the Banshee, and those are quite weak and easy to destroy in Infinite for some reason, so vehicle gameplay is basically not viable. Now, to the game's credit, it does have a fast travel system, so I guess that's okay, but I'm someone who doesn't really like to use fast traveling in open world games. Add to this the fact that making the game extremely unfriendly to any kind of vehicle gameplay further emphasizes the repetitiveness that we have to talk about the lack of a real weapons sandbox as well. I've mentioned this in past videos, but 343 brought the Banished into Halo Infinite, this new brute faction that, aside from Halo Wars 2, we've never seen in a Halo game before. So why is it that with them, we don't see the return of classic brute weapons like the Mauler, Spiker, or Brute Shot? What about the Brute Plasma Rifle? We see all of these, bar the exception of the Mauler, being used by the Banished in Halo Wars 2. So why are none of them in Halo Infinite? What about things like the Carbine, or the Fuel Rod Gun, or on the UNSC side, what about the Saw, or the Railgun even, or the DMR? Much like the weapon sandbox, the vehicle sandbox is really limited as well. You've got no Gas Hog, no Mantis, no Brute Prowler, or what about that Marauder that was in Halo Wars 2? I'm pretty sure in one section of the map you can actually see a Marauder that's a wreck on the side of the road, but you can't use it. Really basic stuff like this makes me think that not a whole lot of effort was put into this campaign. It almost feels like an afterthought. I had read somewhere that after the delay, about 2/3 of Infinite's campaign was cut, and it really does show. Now, cut content isn't something new to the gaming industry, and especially isn't new to Halo, but a thing that can be said about all the previous games, especially the Bungie games, is that no matter how much content may have been cut, the end result still felt like a relatively full experience. Halo Infinite, and I've said this before, feels more like an early access demo, but unlike the multiplayer, which gets updates at the pace of a dead snail, the campaign gets absolutely nothing. What you see out of the box is what you get. So we have boring, repetitive environments, a lackluster weapon sandbox, and limited vehicles that can't seem to even go off-road for a second because they get stuck on trees. So what do we have? Well, let's talk about the visuals. They're better than the initial gameplay reveal trailer, but they haven't been improved as much as a lot of people say. I feel like there's this weird consensus within the Halo community that they really turned it around graphically and they saved the game by adding a little bit of detail to the assault rifle and Chief's armor, but many textures still look flat and plasticky, especially on the Banished tech and the Marines. I mean, look at these guys. Speaking of Marines, why is it that we only seem to get a few variants of them and they all look more or less the same? The Marines in Halo's past had character. I mean, remember each and every one of their appearances, whether they had special backpacks on, maybe a boonie hat, a goatee, a bandana, bandages. They were all unique. For a UNSC that is supposedly on the run and very ragtag at this point in the story, the Marines all look painfully uniform, almost like stormtroopers, all dressed in the same exact outfits almost, and it just feels lazy. Then you have the visuals of the environment itself. Everything just looks 10 levels of off. The sky is often too blue, some areas are way too bright, while others are way too dark, and the textures aren't something to write home about either. Add to this, for what it is, the game runs like absolute crap. Long loading times, random frame dips, the occasional stuttering. I mean, how did they put something out that looked like it came out in 2011 and yet it runs so poorly on modern systems? I think by far my biggest gripes with the visuals come down to two things: the effects and the cutscenes. Let's start with the effects here. The explosions look terrible. They look like something out of a mobile game from the mid-2010s, and the cutscenes just look like a low-budget children's TV show. I mean, come on. Halo 4 and 5 had significantly higher quality cutscenes. Look how jagged, blocky, and mechanical this brute's facial animations are. There's also nearly a complete lack of any dirt or dust kicking up when driving the Warthog, which is nothing like the first trailer we saw back in 2018. Just look at this trailer. Look how amazing the game looks, but the final product looks nothing like it at all. I would go as far to say that this was just straight up false advertising. Now, before I get into the story, I wanted to talk a bit more about the gameplay. Like I said before, the core gameplay loop was pretty fun. I personally think they nailed that. Most of the weapons felt good to use, and enemies didn't feel too weak or too overpowered. But beyond that is where I have a major problem. Beyond the basic gameplay. Remember when I was saying that it was boring and repetitive? Well, I can't emphasize that enough. Halo Infinite sprinkled random boss fights around its campaign, and while some of them were fun, the vast majority of them are painful. Most of the boss battles pitted you up against brutes that were essentially just giant bullet sponges that did nothing but constantly charge at you or shoot some ridiculously powerful cannon. There was almost no depth to them, and don't even get me started on the Harbinger fight. It's like 343 learned nothing from the Warden fight in Halo 5. Beyond that, as I mentioned before, we have repetitive environments, but moreover, I think a thing that bothered me most was just how empty the open world felt. I feel like this is a thing with a lot of open world games nowadays, where developers think the term open world means they can make a massive empty level and fill it with only a few main objectives, some copy-paste base capturing or destroying fuel caches, and call it a day without adding in any real substance. One of the things I love so much about games like Skyrim, Fallout, or Stalker is that those games actually give you stuff to do when going from point A to B, beyond just shooting things because they're there. In Skyrim, you'll often run into random NPCs that have a quest for you, give you an important point of information, or most excitingly, you can often find a whole new location full of places and stories to explore and characters that you can actually interact with. The last part there is key, the interaction. In Halo Infinite, none of the NPCs can be interacted with beyond having a Marine get in your Warthog or trading guns with them, but that's about it. How much cooler would it be if instead of just capturing a fob that, by the way, all look the same and are super generic, you arrive at a snowy mountain vista where you find Captain Lasky and some of the remains of Infinity's crew holding off in a big Forerunner ruin. Then you fight your way through the Banished, attacking it, and then Lasky tells you that a few key members of the bridge crew were captured and taken to a Banished prison camp, and then right before you go to rescue them, he gives you some new UNSC Forerunner hybrid weapon that came from the Armory Vaults of Infinity. Then after completing the quest, you could return to the ruins and build up more defenses, get quests from characters, hear some dynamic dialogue, and fend off some Banished raids. That would have been awesome, and if 343 would have just added something like that into the game instead of just the generic clear out the enemies because aliens bad sections, it would have been so much more interesting of a game. And that brings me to my next point, the story, and how much this game lacks in that department. We have all these fobs scattered around the map, yet we get no context for them whatsoever. Why are they there? What were they doing there? Who is or was in charge of them? Why are the Sentinels now working with the Banished? Why is the Endless supposedly more dangerous than the Flood? What happened to the Guardians? There's just loads of information that just isn't there. Now, I know a lot of people, myself included, didn't like Halo 5's story, but the fact that 343 kept it canon while simultaneously pretending it didn't happen was not only wrong, but it was just, again, lazy. This whole game reeks of laziness beyond comprehension. Throughout the game, we're constantly given expositionary dialogue from the new, but not Cortana, the pilot, and occasionally the Master Chief. Everything is super vague, as if the developers of the game didn't know what to write, so they were just making it up as they went along. Not to mention that there were some cutscenes that were so forced and out of character that they just felt straight up cringy sometimes. Then you, of course, have the stereotypical cookie-cutter, screaming, angry ape man as the main villain. I mean, it doesn't get much more generic than that. There's no creativity, no continuity, and the whole story just doesn't make sense. Why are the Banished just constantly skulking around? They don't seem to be doing much of anything other than just kind of standing there so we have something to shoot. They don't seem to have any goals other than rebuilding the ring, but they don't hunt down the survivors. They don't seem to really do much of anything, and neither does the UNSC. Everybody's just standing there. The world feels very fake. It doesn't feel alive. And then, going back to the cutscenes, some of them just don't make any sense. Like this one here. Why is the Master Chief jumping after the Harbinger like he's some kind of frog when he has a literal Sentinel beam in his hands? Just shoot her with the Sentinel beam. There are a lot of things like this that seem like nobody thought to go back and revise or review this at all. Like it was all just a rough draft that was never meant to be the final product, and quite frankly, it really takes away from the overall presentation. Now, Halo Infinite's campaign isn't all bad. There were some things I really liked. The ability to throw fusion coils was really neat, and I think they finally got the Forerunners right as far as design from my point of view. The art style of the Forerunner interiors and weapons looked great, as did the Sentinels, but I can't help but think that this was just doing the bare minimum here. I mean, it seems like for the past decade, 343 has had a constant problem of figuring out what Halo even is, and the fact that the community praises them so much for just respecting and maintaining what the franchise is based off of is kind of sad. I don't know of any other franchise where people count "it looks like what it's supposed to" as some kind of positive. It's just one of those things that just should be, and if it isn't, there's a problem. It's like 343 has set the bar of expectations so low that mediocrity or basic standard levels of doing the right thing is praised and celebrated. It's like 343's only concern is to make money, and they have no interest in making a cool game. I mean, they even promote the microtransactions in the loading screen for the campaign now. Stuff that you can't even use in campaign, they constantly show you screenshots of every time you respawn. It's like the game is telling you, hey, go play multiplayer. Hey, go buy the battle pass. Hey, go grind challenges. Even though you're just trying to play campaign. It's honestly kind of pathetic. At the end of the day, I honestly think that this campaign is yet just another flop from 343 Industries. Sure, maybe it's slightly better than Halo 4 and 5, but that isn't a hard thing to do. It definitely was not worth anywhere near $60. I think a release price of $30 or $40 absolute max would have been about right in terms of value for money. But really, I can't recommend this game at all. Even if you don't care about the multiplayer side of this and just want to play the campaign, it's not only not worth your money, but it's not worth your time. The story ends unconclusively. We never find out what the Endless even are or what they want. The whole thing feels like filler to some larger plot that I suspect may have initially been planned to be DLC, but that's definitely scrapped now. I know some will say there was never any DLC planned, but I honestly don't believe that. But then again, who knows? 343 has repeatedly displayed that they are the incompetent, so I guess it is what it is. Halo Infinite, for me at least, was a huge letdown in every aspect, but as a lore nerd and a former campaign enjoyer, I have to say this one really hit hard and made me decide to never buy another Halo game on release again, if I even buy it at all. This franchise is just too broken and mismanaged at this point to care about it anymore. At this point in time, I'm speculating that there might not even be another story-based Halo game ever again, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but it seems like with all the layoffs at 343, the story team being hit quite hard, as well as more multiplayer live service being pushed by Microsoft, it just seems like it wouldn't be surprising to me at all if 343 and Microsoft went with an online-only multiplayer approach to future Halo games. And this is really a shame to say, but like I said, it is what it is. But that's my 2 cents for the day. As always, I thank you for watching. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think. Are you still clinging on to hope that this franchise might turn around? I'm not. It's been 10 plus years of 343 will fix it, and oh, they're finally listening to us, and, well, we have Halo Infinite. Enough is enough. But anyways, I have been Broken Circle, and as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and stay safe. Goodbye, guys.